been working on this for about the past year, and Aaron has filed just dozens, if not, how many sunshine requests do you think you're up to now?
Several hundred.
Several hundred. Wow, that is incredible. But these organizations are just incredibly secretive. We've had some that have claimed literally not to exist. We've had some that have said that they are not public entities, that they are not subject to sunshine laws. So this is really powerful stuff, because these organizations have basically been used to operating with complete impunity, completely outside of the realm of public transparency. And Aaron's work is the first that I know of, at least in the state, and probably nationwide. There has not been a whole lot of coverage of the operations of these drug task forces, even nationwide, to really look at how unaccountable these organizations are. And it looks like Aaron's got those queued up now, so I think we're good to go.
Yeah, touching on that, I don't know if any of you happen to follow our good friends in Oregon who saw the legalization and taxation of cannabis in November, just a few weeks ago. But there were some very effective researchers up there as well who really for the first time did take a look at some of the ways that forfeiture money was being spent, some of the narcotics enforcement agents that were up there, and the ways in which different resources were being used in ways that probably didn't benefit the majority of the population. So the same is very much true here in Missouri. The title of the report that you're looking at, Drug Task Forces in Missouri, Secretive, Dangerous, and Unaccountable. They are, and I hope that I can convince you why, and it probably won't take much. There are 27 drug task forces in Missouri. That is 27 more than there should be. Drug task forces in Missouri do not serve a legitimate public safety goal. They rather are the embodiment of the very, very worst of the war on drugs, and I think you'll see why. Of these 27, only 24 are now in operation. Budget cuts over the last year have reduced the federal funding for drug task forces from about $4.5 million to around $3 million in 2014. And we see this as a good thing. These drug task forces don't particularly serve the public good, and there are far better ways to enforce existing narcotics laws. So these task forces are broken down in a regional manner. They generally are comprised of several counties. As per state law, in order to be eligible for this federal funding that's passed down through the state and onto these task forces, you have to be comprised of more than one entity. And so, despite that, the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department does have a secretive St. Louis Drug Task Force that they don't like to acknowledge exists. Part of the reason is probably because they don't have more than one entity involved in that task force, or at least they didn't until we pointed this out. So we were wondering, what this particular task force might be up to. They're called the St. Louis Metro Undercover Drug Task Force. They're the only task force that claims to be secretive in their name. And I happened to send off a little bit of a pretty straightforward sunshine request to the attorneys over at the St. Louis Metro Police Department. A gentleman named Mark Lawson, who works over there, asked him, hey, could I have some basic documentation about what arrests you're making, how your money's being spent, generally what's happening with that funding. Well, much to my surprise, Mr. Lawson responded that St. Louis doesn't have a St. Louis Metro Drug Task Force. Well, I knew they did. That map, of course, is from the Highway Patrol's website, or it was. They took it down. So I asked Mr. Lawson, find out what was going on. I explained to him that there is a very high probability of this task force existing, given that they were mentioned in other documents put out by the Missouri Department of Public Safety. He asked his chief of police, who also had no freaking idea, or so he says, that this task force was even in existence. But his chief of police is the project director for the St. Louis Metro Drug Task Force. And if you look a little bit closer, Mark Lawson, the very attorney who told me the task force didn't exist, is the authorized contact official for the St. Louis Metropolitan Drug Task Force. That means that he personally signed a contract for $200,000 for the St. Louis Metro Drug Task Force for the year 2014. That's a lot of money for a task force that doesn't exist. The government should have to acknowledge entities that exist. So we go a little bit further south into Jefferson County, and things get even weirder. In Jefferson County, you have a task force called the Jefferson County Multi-Jurisdictional Enforcement Unit, and they're comprised of county sheriff in Jefferson County and a number of local police departments, other agencies. And there's a law in the books that if you're going to have one of these multi-jurisdictional task forces and you're going to get state money, you have to have a policy board. You have to have a multi-jurisdictional policy board that's comprised of the different entities that decides, hey, is this appropriate in terms of looking at the actions that are being carried out by those action takers. And so, as you might not be shocked to learn, this particular task force doesn't even have the established policy board comprised of the mandated individuals. Now, this is a requirement for state and federal funding. Despite this fact, the state of Missouri has not at any point threatened to withdraw the funding from the Jefferson County Municipal Enforcement Group. That matters, but perhaps what matters more is the fact that this means there are half a dozen or a dozen drug warriors running around in Jefferson County, and there's nobody overseeing them. This is the only entity that would oversee a task force, this potential multi-jurisdictional board. Jefferson County, as well as a couple other drug task forces, do not have this board in existence. Since this has been pointed out, steps have been taken to establish a somewhat frivolous policy board. I'm not sure if they've succeeded in doing so yet, but the document you're seeing on the screen right now is from an audit from the Department of Public Safety, the state entity, who go around and look at these task forces and sure enough notice that this one didn't have anybody overseeing them. So, when I tried to file a sunshine request with this task force, I was asking them, hey, can I have some basic documents about what you're doing? Can I figure out who's on your policy board, etc.? And I emailed the commander of the task force, a gentleman named Chris Hoffman with the sheriff's office over there. He was kind enough to send me a very rude email back and basically told me that this wasn't his problem. I asked him to answer a number of questions. The state sunshine law requires a response within 3 days. That's a very good thing. It allows for open records to be available to the public on short notice. This individual felt that the answers to my very basic questions about how this task force operated, who they were shooting, who they were arresting, and for what drugs, would be answered at his convenience, not in accordance with state law. So, we were able to eventually escalate that situation, and they finally took away Captain Hoffman's email privileges, or at least told him to stop responding to me, and he did, but not before sending me a slew of nasty emails, and here are two of the more obnoxious ones. But it does seem that there's an individual over there now who is willing to provide records, but they don't show much that's very good about what the task force is doing. They don't make a lot of arrests, and it's very hard to discern what else they do because they don't say. Hop on over to the other side of the state now, and we've got those one county and those really small multi-jurisdictional units, but you also have these really large multi-jurisdictional units. And so you have an agency up here called NITRO. They tend to come up with the acronyms on their own, probably because they think they sound cool. This agency actually left out, the NITRO stands for Northwest Interagency Team of Response Operation. But they left out Missouri. Their actual title is the Northwest Missouri Interagency Response Operation, and they, to make the acronym fit, decided to call themselves NITRO. And so they're the Northwest Task Force, but not really clear what state. Obviously, it's this state, and this is, in my opinion, the worst of the 27. They're comprised of over a dozen counties, and when I called their listed number to ask them where I could send my sunshine request, I asked who I was talking to. It was a number listed on that Highway Patrol document. Again, that document has been taken down now, but it is screen capped and available at the Show-Me Cannabis website for your convenience. They told me that I was not talking to the NITRO Task Force. I was talking to the NITRO Task Force. So after about 3 or 4 minutes of going back and forth and kind of arguing with this particular individual, knowing that he was lying through his teeth and not even being subtle about it, later in the conversation he does tell me to contact somebody else for my sunshine request. And I ask, okay, who should I tell him told me to contact him? They eventually stammer around and say, yeah, well, I guess this is the NITRO Task Force. It goes without saying that it's completely inappropriate to lie to individuals who call your publicly listed number trying to file a legal open records request. Given the impropriety of some of these groups in the past, and given that Missouri is a one-party consent state for audio recording, we do have audio recordings of all of these wonderful conversations, and I'm happy to play them for you at the end. They are quite amusing. So upon trying to figure out what NITRO was up to, I was told to contact ATF. That was who the request was forwarded to and why I had to ask who was forwarding that request. And they have a public information officer over in their Kansas City field office. NITRO claims to be under the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They aren't, because they are a state agency, they receive state funding, and they are run by the state. As such, they are very clearly subject to the Sunshine Law, despite the fact that they don't feel that they are. So I contact their public information officer and try and get some information through him. Go so far as to file a federal Freedom of Information Act request. And the individual, the public information officer over at ATF, gets back to me and says, hey, I know you were writing something about this. I wasn't able to get you any information. I tried to reach out to Nitro and we spoke on the phone a little bit. He was not able to get in contact with Nitro. I wonder who they pretended to be when he called. So he doesn't end up getting me anything. There are no documents released, and to this day, nobody has any idea what Nitro is doing. They are a quasi-state, quasi-federal agency, and that is about all we know, and that is terrifying, and it should be. They're funded to the tune of about $250,000 a year. They have about 10 officers who tend to run around without patches or badges, according to a lot of anecdotes we've heard from that area, and we don't know what else they do, and that's really concerning. There shouldn't be entities that run around with badges and guns without us knowing who they are or what they do. And the fact that they felt the need to pretend to be somebody else is particularly concerning, given the amount of authority that they have. These drug task forces tend to be given a lot more power than traditional police are, in the sense that there isn't really a chain of command beyond the commander. And also, they're multi-jurisdictional, so they have increased power. They have increased authority in that way. But they also have less oversight by far than traditional police would. I mean, a situation like this, where individual commanders are emailing me ridiculous things and refusing to comply with open records requests, etc., well, these legitimate police departments have custodians of records as required by the law. They know how to keep records. They follow the law, and generally, they're self-aware enough to know that if you don't follow the Sunshine Law, somebody is going to come and make you follow the Sunshine Law through litigation or something else. So this is by far the most concerning drug task force to me. If you only remember one of the names of these 27 ridiculous task forces, Nitro is the one to be afraid of. They have over 12 counties in their jurisdiction. They claim to be both state and federal, which they can't be because you have to be one or the other. Somebody has to be your boss. And they have an extremely large jurisdiction. If you move south a little bit into Platte County, there's an organization called the Platte County Multi-Jurisdictional Enforcement Group. It's somewhat similar to the Jefferson County one in that it's mainly run by the Platte County Sheriff in coordination with any other local police departments that are around the Platte County area. I asked them for some very basic records, just some 2 years worth of documents totaling about 15 pages, showing very basically who they arrested and what they arrested them for. And they asked me to prepay a sum of $100 for these records. Well, of course I refused, and we went back and forth and fought a little bit on this one, but the Sunshine Law is pretty clear about what you can be charged for records. You can be charged the minimal required research time to compile the records that you request. You can be charged 10 cents a page. Well, unless it took 10 hours at $100, or sorry, 10 hours at $10 an hour, or there were 1,000 pages and there were 15. $100 is probably not a reasonable estimate for the documents that I was requesting. I can't imagine why the Platte County Multi-Jurisdictional Enforcement Group might not have wanted us to know exactly who they were arresting. It's because they're worthless. They make more arrests for paraphernalia, marijuana sale, and marijuana possession than the rest of their drugs combined. Now, those marijuana possession charges, 28 charges for the possession of marijuana, that means that they couldn't even get those folks on distribution charges. These folks are not large-scale marijuana dealers by any sense. They're very likely very small-time guys, if anything at all. And the priorities of this particular task force are extraordinarily warped. Missouri no longer is the meth capital of the state. I used to get to say the meth capital of the state focuses on marijuana with their drug task forces, but we're still second, and it's still ridiculous. And as you can see, this agency covers about 12 or 14 counties up in northwest Missouri, and they focus on marijuana and made 28 arrests for the possession of marijuana. Now, $250,000, this is what you get. And I can't imagine why they wouldn't want us to have this information. Surely it doesn't make them look silly at all. So you go south to the Springfield area, and you get a task force called Comet. They operate out of the Greene County Sheriff's Department, and they are involved in 7 counties there, it looks like, although the jurisdiction of all of these task forces bleeds well outside their jurisdiction in a lot of cases. The memos of understanding that these agencies enter into oftentimes cover more territory than they tell the public or that is represented in maps like this. So you've got the Comet Task Force down in Springfield, and I was kind of curious what they might be up to. Filed a sunshine request, sent an email down to the Greene County Sheriff's Office, and asked them for some very basic records. They didn't want to give them to me, and they were talking internally about how they were going to best avoid giving me the records they are required to disclose by law. Oops, they sent me the email. So this might not be big enough to read. I'll read the very bottom of it because that's the best part. I'd like to send Malin, that's me, a response letter to both of these requests suggesting he contact Comet or TPS without telling him we're trying to find out from Comet what happened to his request, of course. ... So what this means is that the Greene County Sheriff's Office, who oversees Comet, tried to contact Comet. They couldn't get a response out of them. Most of us would be fired if we ignored our boss's phone calls for several days on end, especially while state law required a response. But sure enough, Greene County Sheriff couldn't get a response from Comet. Obviously, they didn't want to send this to me because it shows how incompetent they are. But if you have Comet running around with a dozen officers, $250,000, lots of guns, and no responsibility whatsoever, you end up with an agency that doesn't feel the need to respond to phone calls from its director. So we went back and forth, and I obviously responded and told them, hey, you sent me that email, what the hell's going on here, and do you really think you're going to get away with this, whether or not you accidentally sent me these emails? And back and forth, and they finally get around to sending me this very long response here. It's 2 pages long. And they tell me, we'll give you a little bit of what you want, but most of it, yeah, you're on your own. We're not going to give you most of that because, well, we don't want to. I'm not really sure why. And one of the sections they cite here is a section of law, Revised Statute of Missouri, 610.021, Section 18, as part of the reason that they could not give me their information about what drugs people were being arrested for. This is about terrorism. It's a terrorism section. And this is ridiculous. So the law allows these agencies to redact information or not provide information if it specifically relates to a critical incident which appears to be terrorist in nature. The documents I requested were basic data asking how many people you arrested for different drugs. Obviously, not terrorist in nature, not even close to this exception. To my knowledge, it's never been used as a response to a sunshine law in any case that I'm familiar with. And yet the Greene County Sheriff's Department decided that they were going to send me this response and cite the terrorism exception to the sunshine law as part of their reason for not responding to my sunshine request. Needless to say, this didn't fly. We have the documents. But they sent them to me in a really bloody envelope. I have no idea why. We are still trying to figure out why. I received this 3 days ago after months of fighting with Comet, and it was smeared with blood. What kind of blood? Human blood? Animal blood? It's human blood. We tested it. It's definitely human blood. So we have no idea why they sent us an envelope smeared with human blood. It could have been an innocent mistake, but given how much other really ridiculous, silly stuff's going on here, I felt like that was a relevant part of this presentation. So, also, I'm still a little bit weirded out because I just got it a couple days ago, and would love to hear what y'all think. So if you go north a little bit, up into Boone County, you have the Missouri Narcotic Officers Association. Now, they are not a drug task force, but they provide training to the drug task forces in the state of Missouri. But there is a local drug task force called the Mustang Drug Task Force that operates in those very same counties. And we'll go to that one first. You've got this Mustang Task Force operating in Columbia, Callaway County, Boone County, the surrounding areas. They're extremely obnoxious and aggressive as well, and I've had a couple of run-ins with them as well. They refused to provide documents in a similar manner to Platte County. They requested $70.50 or something else ridiculous for 12 pages of documents. I refused to pay $70 for 12 pages of documents, and as such said, as is allowed under the Sunshine Law, that I didn't want copies of the documents. I wanted to see them for myself. So I went down to the office of the sheriff in Cole County, and it's not a very warming place to be, although it's a very new, beautiful building down there in Jefferson City. And I said, hey, look, I'm here to see these documents, and I made an appointment to see them as is allowed under the Sunshine Law. Well, they weren't very nice. I went in and I was looking through the documents, and they had a couple of officers there who were, clearly there to intimidate me, and a couple of other lawyers there, and made it into a very big, silly production in an incredibly unnecessary way. And again, because Missouri is a one-party consent state, and again, because I had past run-ins with these clowns, I was wearing an audio recorder, and again, they didn't like that very much. So there's a wonderful audio recording of my interaction here as well. I go in, I start to look through the records that are provided to me on the table, and I notice that there are some redactions. They've redacted a very significant amount of information from their records. The section on the right is the one from Mustang. The one on the left is the exact same document that I got from a request directly to the Department of Public Safety. They have to submit this document, these numbers, from the task force to the State Department of Public Safety. And when they do, that information becomes sunshineable through either the task force or the Department of Public Safety. So I got it from DPS. I asked for it from Mustang. And when I went in to look at those same records, there was a little bit of overlap there. I happened to get a page from both that was identical, but it wasn't identical. Mustang decided they were going to redact all of the information that pertains to how their task force operates. This is really basic information, and if you can't see it, I'm happy to read it for you. The number of agencies operating in the task force, number of agencies who have signed a memo of understanding with the task force, the number of agencies providing resources to the task force, etc. So these are numbers like, 7, 5, and 2. This is not serious information. These are not the names of undercover officers. These are numbers, most of them single-digit numbers. And sure enough, the information is available from the Department of Public Safety, but again raises the question, Mustang, who do you think you are, and why can you redact open information when the public comes to see it? Well, they felt as though that wasn't a very nice question to ask, and decided to get into a little bit of confrontation with me. And at one point, one of the officers in the room was kind enough to reach for his belt and indicate that he was going to arrest me for taking photographs of the records. Now, I take out my phone to take pictures because they don't want to give me copies. And he says, well, no, you can't take pictures, and indicates that he's going to arrest me if I continue to take pictures. Well, the law allows you to take pictures, and so I'm going, okay, arrest me for taking pictures. This will be the best thing that's ever happened to me. Go for it. This will be the end of your task force. Sure enough, he doesn't go for it, and I guess saw me as too confident because I said, hey, this is an open records law, and this is really silly, and started taking pictures, and I guess that was the end of that. So there's a wonderful audio recording of this interaction as well. It includes the local lawyer for the Mustang Drug Task Force, pretty much screaming at me because she's unhappy that I'm questioning why she's redacted basic information, like numbers other than 0. And hopefully we'll have a chance to play that at the end as well if we have time. So these task forces are trained by the Missouri Narcotic Officers Association. They're a quasi-governmental nonprofit entity operating in Boone County, and they hold annual training for these task forces. That's really the majority of what they do. And they hold this training every year down at the Lake of the Ozarks, and it's taxpayer funded. We pay for it indirectly and directly. We pay these task forces to pay the money to the Missouri Narcotic Officers Association to train them. They essentially contract out their training, but maybe they shouldn't because it doesn't go very well. In 2012, there was an event called Marijuana Legalization, Why Not? By Detective Sergeant Jason Grellner from Franklin County. This is not an appropriate use of taxpayer resources. This is not police training, as goes without saying. Learning about why Show-Me Cannabis should not succeed with their initiative does not constitute learning how to make the people you protect safer, and as such should be called into question, and obviously, sure as hell should not be paid for with taxpayer money. But it gets worse. One of the documents from these training sessions, again taxpayer funded, and again, this counts as police law enforcement training. They have to receive 4 post-continuing training hours every year, and this can count for their training hours. It counts as a law enforcement certified course, and it's been certified by the Department of Public Safety. It's about why legalization is a terrible idea, and it's full of the most ridiculous information imaginable. And to illustrate this, you can look at the syllabus where the question for one of the topics is, was alcohol prohibition a failure? And in this alternative reality, the answer is actually it was relatively successful. So if you wonder why the police officers you deal with on a daily basis are not necessarily the most informed, it's likely because this counts as training for police officers. Remember, state approved that training. So the Missouri Narcotic Officers Association decided, when I filed some sunshine requests with them, that they didn't like that very much. They felt because they didn't receive taxpayer money directly from the state, but because it went to the drug task forces and then to them indirectly, that they weren't subject to tell us how that money was spent. Well, lo and behold, they were wrong, and we sued them, and we got exactly what we wanted out of it. And we are very, very close to settling this up. But it is going to result in exactly what we wanted. We're going to get all the documents we wanted, and then some, and also an acknowledgement that we're going to be able to continue here forward with the Missouri Narcotic Officers Association. But the documents, in the meantime, we were able to get these documents again from the Department of Public Safety because they approved the course. So when the task force submits, or when MNOA submits these documents to DPS for approval, they then become subject to the open records law through MNOA or through DPS. And once MNOA said, I'm not going to give you these, of course we didn't let up, we kept fighting, but we also went and got them from DPS. Well, this is what they show. This is the ridiculousness of the course that is being taught. And again, this is approved by DPS as a certified law enforcement course. I contacted DPS for comment before we published this information, and their public information officer commented on the record that this is in fact an appropriate use of law enforcement training. So again, the Missouri Narcotic Officers Association really does pervade a lot of the different task forces and the activities that they do, especially when the training that they do is so... Turn your mic on. No, it's off. It died. Yeah, it died off. There we go. Yeah. All right, we'll go for this one. Just have to get its attention. All right, no? No? All right, well... So the Missouri Narcotic Officers Association training is very pervasive, and there's a lot of individuals who receive that training. Several hundred officers attend that conference every year, and a lot of them receive training like this. And the topics covered, unfortunately, don't get much better in a lot of cases. There is not just one, but 3 different anti-legalization courses taught over the course of the last 3 years. This is not an isolated incident. They're taught by different people. This particular year, in 2014, just a few months ago, Tom Groman from the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Task Force was flown all the way down here with taxpayer money to present at this particular training session. And again, officers got training. The syllabus that I showed was actually from Mr. Groman's session. It wasn't from Mr. Grellner's session, although Mr. Grellner's session had similarly silly documents. But this is a training that, the drug task forces attend this. Almost every single drug task force, if not all of them, are in attendance. Large numbers attend these seminars, and this is the only training that a lot of these task forces receive all year. Some of them even acknowledge that when they write out and explain that they use taxpayer money to fund this conference, which is obviously inappropriate if there's political activity being funded. They justify it by saying, this is the only training we get all year. When you couple that with the fact that they have an extraordinary amount of power and an extraordinary lack of oversight, you have an extraordinarily dangerous combination. If you're interested in more of this, I've been putting up a number of different research posts. Now we're both good. All right. Well, I put up a number of different research posts on the Show Me Cannabis website, showmecannabis.com/research. A number of these incidents are also covered in the report that many of you are reading right now. We're looking forward to publishing that report in January of 2015, and right now we are on working draft number 6. So if you have any feedback, we would love to hear from you. And also, if you're interested in reading more, or perhaps hearing the audio, depending on how long I talk for, we might have time for that. All of this is available, including all of the audio recordings I mentioned, at showmecannabis.com/research. So with that, I can take questions. I want to know how much time we've got first. Somebody can tell me what time it is. Or 10 minutes. 10 minutes for questions? All right, great. So I'd love to take some questions if you don't mind.
So in order to continue to get funds, do these organizations have to show a track record of so many arrests or so much?
No, it's a free-for-all.
Whether it's state or federal?
Well, these task forces are state-run. I think we're going to need some new batteries for our panelists later. Somebody can track down some batteries for later, that'd be awesome. But the answer is no. There's no contingency. The department doesn't do anything and say, we're going to pull your funding. Nobody's ever had their funding pulled. When federal funding reduces, that's when those 3 task forces disappear and the number goes from 27 to 24. But there have been, this has been going on for a year. This is a year plus of research and a year plus of impropriety. And none of these task forces have been shut down.